talking Illinois high school football.
If your goals are as high as you talk about, tonight's the night you go out and just take one more step.
It's a view from the West.
And it starts right now!
Welcome into View from the West podcast. I'm your host, Greg Armstrong. Thank you so much for listening, for downloading, for subscribing. Our numbers keep growing every week. Our Twitter following keeps getting bigger. We love it. We love to be a part of the high school football community on the northwestern side of the state of Illinois. Of course, View from the West, we're covering high school football from the Western Big Six, the Lincoln Trail Conference, the Three Rivers Athletic Conference, and the Northwest Upstate Illini. We had some huge games in the NUIC. So we're gonna switch it up this week, and that's where we're starting. We're starting with some small school football. Mitch will be in a little bit later to join me to run through everything else. But for this week, if we're talking NUIC football, we're talking maybe the game of the year at any level in our area. We're talking to Kyle Kampmier from NUICfootball.com. Kyle, what a week of football. Thank you so much for being here to break it all down.
Oh, man, thank you. It was an awesome week of football. Obviously, we saw some big games across the NUIC, across small school landscape altogether, and it really shifted some things as we take a look at the playoff picture coming up, too.
Yeah, things are getting really interesting. We got to start in the NUIC. I think everybody knows where we're going next here. If we're starting in the NUIC, we're starting in the game of the year, Du-Pec versus Lena-Winslow. Du-Pec going on the road to Lena-Winslow. I think you phrased it best, and you said the old guard versus the new up-and-comer. I wanted like the NBC Sports, hype video surrounding those texts, because you nailed it. That was what it was.
And it is. I mean, you take a look, when you talk Class 1A football and you talk NUIC, Lena-Winslow's been in the forefront of that conversation all the way back to 2006. So, I mean, they've really built that program up, and we've talked about it numerous times in the past. And when you take a look at where they've been just since 2009, moving forward, they have been the talk of the conference. Everybody pins that game on their calendar as a must-win game, or a big game in their eyes. And with Du-Pec just forming their co-op here a couple years ago, they're in season 5 now. They want to show everybody that they're not just some make-believe team that came out of nowhere. They want to prove it. And Friday night, they did just that.
So before we jump into the game, Kyle, you were there. You were walking the sidelines. Just tell me about the atmosphere and just walking in. I saw some highlights out of Rockford, and they scanned the entire crowd, all 100 yards, and that place was packed. I mean, that's what you live for. That's the Friday night you love to go to.
It was awesome. So I actually left my house about 5:15 Friday, which is earlier than I normally leave. And partly it was due to the fact that I wanted to be there to be able to get a parking spot where I wanted to park. But when I pulled into Lena, and it only takes me about 25, 30 minutes to get to Lena from my house. And when I pulled in there, the entire park where the baseball diamond is off to the side of the football field was packed. The junior high lots were starting to fill in. The high school lot was about packed. People were everywhere. I mean, the atmosphere was electric, and it had that vibe of a late round playoff game.
Yeah, I love that. You know that buzz when you feel it. You know that energy when you walk into a stadium, into a Friday night atmosphere like that. So Du-Pec gets the big win. They get the statement win, the win that this program, I think, really pushes them to the next level. They get the win 30-24. But man, it looked like it was going to be a lot easier than that in the beginning. They built a big lead. Kyle, tell me about kind of how this game started.
Well, really, it started off with Du-Pec getting the ball, and right off the bat, they hit a pass play to Trent, they hit a pass play to Trent Hedlund that moved the ball forward. They were able to get a little bit of running going, and Lena-Winslow actually put up a stop and had pushed Du-Pec back, but then Hoffman connected with Hetland again for that 38-yard score. And then Trenton Taylor went into a wildcat formation for the 2-point conversion to get the early 8-0 lead, not just 3 minutes into the first quarter. When they turned around on defense, they just met Lena-Winslow's intensity and just shut that run game down. Held them to that 11 yards. They were able to force the punt. When they got the ball back, they went on the drive again. They capitalized that drive going 73 yards. They capped it off with the touchdown pass from Hoffman to Bo Seaton. They missed a 2-point conversion, but that was able to give them a 14-0 lead right at the beginning of the second quarter, which at that time, being up 2 scores, you knew it was still a game. Lena-Winslow still had opportunities to get back in it, but it's exactly what Du-Pec needed to put together in order to take control of the game. There in the second quarter, they started to slug it out a little bit. Were able to exchange some punts. But then with 5 minutes to go in the half, Du-Pec took over at their own 14-yard line. They got a huge run by Trenton Taylor, which pushed the ball into Lena-Winslow territory. There again, they picked up some good pass plays to Trent Hetland before Hoffman again connected with Bo Seaton for another 12-yard touchdown connection. Taylor again added the 2-point conversion, and here now we're looking at a 22-0 lead with under a minute to go in the half, and you're like, wow, Du-Pec's going to go in with this huge lead. Well, on that conversion, there was a penalty that got assessed on the kickoff, gave Lena-Winslow the ball at midfield. Wasn't quite too sure what was going on with the play calling. Lena-Winslow had 2 timeouts, I believe, or at least a timeout, I know for sure. They ran the ball a couple times with Mari Roby. We were able to get some things going there, but it wasn't substantial enough. They got to the 31-yard line, and it looked like Luke Benson was going to throw an interception. Bo Seaton was right there, and Brody Mann just came around, grabbed the ball basically right out of Seaton's hands, and fell right into the end zone for a touchdown. And then Ethan Fye added the 2-point conversion, and just like that, the time had expired. Lena-Winslow scored to make it 22-8, and they had all that momentum going into halftime.
Isn't it crazy to think that they're still losing 22-8, but you got to imagine that there's such a shift in momentum. Sure, Du-Pec still feels pretty good going into the half, but man, not nearly as good as they did about 2 seconds ago or 2 minutes ago. You know, it's such a change. How big was that, do you think, to kind of spur on Lena-Winslow? Not that they have no lack of confidence, but they certainly needed a spark, and they got one.
That spark was huge because the fans just – the Lena-Winslow fans got into that game. The place erupted when Lena-Winslow scored that touchdown. You could see the excitement in the Lena-Winslow players as well, knowing that they just got a big one right before the half. Plus, they were getting the ball to start the second half, so all they had to do was carry it over. And when they came out to start the second half, they were no longer receiving the punch. They were giving the punch back to Du-Pec. They were able to start getting things going on the ground more efficiently with Roby and with Fye, where they were able to drive down, pushed it down Du-Pec's throats a little bit, and then Roby punched it in for a touchdown. And then they got a big 2-point conversion pass from Benson to Mann again to cut that lead to 22-16. And then they were able to get Du-Pec to turn the ball over on downs on their next possession. They went on the offense again, were able to get it deep into Lena-Winslow territory, but then they just shut them down and at their own 25-yard line. And then they just took over again, went 75 yards and scored on a huge pass play from Benson to Roby on a 4th and 8 play. So Du-Pec had stopped them, 4th and 8, and they called a pass play, and Roby caught the pass in the back of the end zone, and then Ilders added the 2-point conversion, which gave Lena-Winslow the lead 24-22 with 10:38 left in the game.
That Roby catch was incredible. I mean, he was in a full sprint and his arms are stretched out as far as they could go. And man, it hits him right in the fingertips. He gets 2 feet down and then runs out of bounds. He's lucky he wasn't in front of the goalpost because it could have been really bad. But man, he was going full speed.
It was an incredible play. It was one of those plays that you tend to see Lena-Winslow do in recent years. He kind of snuck out on a backside wheel route when they were going in a bootleg right, and nobody picked him up. He was wide open.
That's that type of like dynamic athleticism that you see from Roby and you see from some of these Lena-Winslow athletes year in and year out. But man, to see him making plays like that, as a receiver and to know what he can do in the backfield, man, you're going to be hearing his name in the next few weeks, making some exciting plays in the playoffs. I'm positive of that.
Yeah, exactly. And, you're going to see a lot of things coming. This was not a bad loss by Lena-Winslow, in my opinion, because these two teams have been battling back and forth with each other ever since they were in junior high at this age group. I mean, we saw it this past spring where Lena-Winslow survived Du-Pec with a 24-21 win, and now you have Du-Pec doing it the opposite way. So these two teams have been going back and forth with each other for quite some time. So while it may look new and appear like a shocking defeat for those that aren't familiar with the area, overall, this was a huge game that everybody knew it was anybody's chance. And I mean, it went down like a classic heavyweight fight. Du-Pec was controlling the early rounds. Lena-Winslow came back in the later rounds to notch it up a bit. And then it was a puncher's chance after that.
Yeah, so when did Du-Pec take the lead? And then I know that Lena-Winslow had the ball back again, and it was a big play on defense that finally sealed the win for Du-Pec.
Yep, so right after Lena-Winslow scored, Du-Pec was able to get the ball back. They started the drive at their own 45-yard line. So they were able to return the kickoff to the 45. And from there, they were able to get the ball moving again. They picked up another big gain from Trenton Taylor. They were able to get some shuffle passes to Trent Hetland that moved the ball forward. And then finally, it was capped off. They went back into that Wildcat formation, and Taylor punched it in from a yard out. And then again, he added another 2-point conversion to give them that 30-24 lead. And for Du-Pec to be able to respond like that after they'd driven the field, were stopped at the 25-yard line, gave up another touchdown that gave the lead to Lena-Winslow, and then they answered that with their own 55-yard touchdown drive to take the lead. There was 5.5 minutes left in the game when that happened. And from there, Lena-Winslow was able to drive a little bit. They started off with great field possession. They were at the Du-Pec 48-yard line. Were able to get to the 38. They called some plays that did not go in their favor on some incomplete passes. Du-Pec was able to get the turnover on downs. They were trying to run out the clock. Lena-Winslow had timeouts, were able to force the punt. And then Lena-Winslow was able to get the ball back. A huge pass play again from Benson to Mann, was able to move the ball into Du-Pec territory. But then they tried to do another pass play on an out route to try to get towards the sidelines to Brady Ilders. And that's when Trent Taylor cut in front of it for the interception to go into victory formation.
Yeah, just a huge play, a huge game-sealing interception for them. I think, when I see the result, 30-24 final, what I look at is the way the game played out. I think you got to give credit to this Du-Pec program because, man, it's human nature to think when Lena-Winslow starts coming back, I think it's human nature to start thinking, here we go again. This team, they got our number, and they're coming back on us again after we have a huge lead. Credit to those players for fighting through it and believing.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times I heard, because at Lena-Winslow, the fans sit on the same side.
Yeah.
And so I'm passing by Lena-Winslow fans. I'm passing by Du-Pec fans. Of course, the Du-Pec fans were all up against the fence line.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there hearing them talking. And they were sitting there saying, oh my gosh, it's the spring game all over again. It's going to happen. Lena-Winslow's going to, I mean, so the self-doubt was definitely setting in with their own fan base as they watched Lena-Winslow continue to battle back. So to see the perseverance of them and the resiliency of them to come back and drive down after giving up a huge lead says a lot to where the program has come from where they built up. 2016, Durand and Pectonica were both 0-9 teams. They were talking about 8-man football back then in both programs. Pectonica wasn't too far removed from canceling their 2013 season. So where this program has come from, it says a lot, and they've done it very quickly.
Yeah, looking at the way the game played out. Talk about Du-Pec's defense. Obviously, Lena-Winslow adjusted and got points on the board. But early in this game, what was Du-Pec doing that was really slowing down Lena? What did you see, or what impressed you out of Du-Pec?
Well, I mean, I hate to say weather affected it because weather affects both teams. But, you could definitely see it early on where the wet field was definitely limiting the cutback opportunities that Lena-Winslow really banks on, especially with the speed that Phi and Roby have. The pressure up front was very good with Breon Green and Jake Anderson getting some pressure up the middle and on the edges. I mean, Breon Green had a huge game tackle to tackle there in the middle of the defense for Du-Pec, which really gave them a lot of push and it allowed their linebackers with Drake Forreston and Caden Degner to just kind of roam around and make plays as well. So they definitely were able to seal off the edge. They were able to push Lena-Winslow inside, and really that's what it came down to. They did not allow the Panthers to get to that outside edge where they seem to find a lot of success.
On the offensive side of the ball, I think what's impressed me this year from the Rivermen is they seem balanced and they seem pretty high end on both sides. They can pass the ball effectively and they can run the ball now. We talked so much about Hunter Hoffman in the spring, and he's still getting his. But, man, there are some running backs doing some work. This is a balanced offense that I think pushes them just a little bit farther, gives them a little extra edge when we start talking postseason play.
Well, and it's one of those critiques that I've noticed with Du-Pec this year, and I've brought it up a couple times in different conversations where it almost looks like, yes, Du-Pec definitely has improved their line play to allow a much, much better run game. I mean, Trenton Taylor's second or third in rushing in the conference right now. And he put up another 107 yards on the ground Friday night to help boost his numbers there as well. And that's not something you would see here in years past with the Rivermen. Yeah, we've known about Hunter Hoffman because he can throw bullets all over the field all day long. And he had a tremendous receiving core in past years. Well, now every team in the area knows that Hunter's going to throw the ball. So they're playing him 10, 15 yards back. And he's still trying to, kind of hit that deep route when the underneath route's open. And, Friday night, he made that adjustment himself where they went more to that underneath route, and that opened up a lot of things for them offensively. And then with the respect that you have to give that pass game, it has definitely opened up the draw play that allows Taylor to get going up the middle so quickly.
Yeah, I've really been impressed with their offense and kind of what they've been able to do. And, like I said, I don't know if it looked the exact same as it did last year, but it's very effective. And, man, they're playing great football on both sides of the ball. So, congratulations to the Rivermen. This, like you've pointed out, this program has come a long way. And, to get a win over a marquee program like Lena-Winslow at Lena-Winslow, I think is a huge testament to them. And like Mitch talked about, like you've referenced already here, this is a tough loss for Lena-Winslow, but man, they're not going anywhere. This is, this doesn't set them back. They still may be the best team in the conference, and Du-Pec got them that one night. Du-Pec is certainly now in the driver's seat to claim the conference championship, both these teams can make claim as being, two of the best in the conference. Clearly, they've separated themselves.
Well, and here's the thing. I mean, we know that in an area game that you cover, we have A-Town and Knoxville coming up. And A-Town is the last remaining undefeated team in Class 1A, most likely to come north. I personally don't anticipate A-Town winning that game with Knoxville.
Yep.
And I mean, if they do pull it off, to me, that's going to be an upset, and great job by the Tornadoes if they can get past the Blue Bullets on that one. But this win does not remove Lena-Winslow from potentially being still the number one seed in the North bracket when the playoffs come out. So it really has not hurt Lena-Winslow at all when you take a look at their place in the playoff bracket.
Yep, that's a great point. And before we move along, plenty of other games to talk about here. Before we move along, I think we have to reference that just because Du-Pec is a 3A school, that doesn't mean that they're going to roll in and beat a 1A team. Of course they will, because they're bigger enrollment. Come on, Kyle, can we get past that? That's ridiculous.
I know. It's one of the things I've been battling over the fact. Ever since we started this, it's one of those talking points that I've been battling against. I mean, we saw it right from the get-go in 2016 when we began NUICfootball.com, and Forreston played St. Teresa in the state championship game. St. Teresa, with the waiver, would have been a Class 3A team. And here they come into Class 1A. They get beat by Forreston by a big score, by the way. And then we continue to see it over the years. I mean, we see Athens compete with Williamsville and Moreau Forsyth every single year. We've seen Tuscola's play with bigger schools over the years. It's just, to me, the whole talk of, well, they're 3A, they should win is a cop-out argument. It's just something that either you're good or you're not good, and it's that simple. I've seen schools, Stockton, for instance, has an under 200 enrollment, and they regularly roll out 50 to 60 players every year.
Yep.
There's a lot of 2A schools that have problems putting 40 guys on a roster. So, it doesn't really come down to the enrollment. It comes down to either you have a program or you don't have a program.
Well, Du-Pec certainly has a program. How about that? Lena-Winslow also. They have a pretty strong program as well. Let's move along, Kyle. The other big game, the score that stuck out to everybody, Fulton gets the win 24-14 over Forreston. I don't know if you go as far as to call this an upset, but I think that with two losses, even though they were to Du-Pec and Lena-Winslow, the two teams we've just been talking about, I think Fulton with two losses was kind of, they were not off the radar, but they weren't in the top conversation. Forreston, on the other hand, has been rolling off victories. They were the team that I think had the publicity coming in because they had won 4 straight. But man, Fulton looked really impressive in this one. They come away with the 24-14 win. They really slowed down this Forreston running game that we've talked a lot about.
Yeah, I mean, you take a look at this matchup, and it's a huge game for sure. Fulton, I would agree with you, was probably not looked at as the favorite coming into this game, simply because of how hot Forreston has been playing. And when you start to stargaze at scoreboard material, you see where Fulton beat Galena by 1 point back in week 1. And we just saw Forreston railroad Galena by 32 points here just a week ago. So that really makes you, wow, Forreston's got everything going. Obviously, the media around the state had Forreston ranked up here in the top 5.
They jumped way up, yeah.
Jumped way up, and Fulton fell way out. And it's like, whoa, hold on, guys. Do you guys not look at who they played? Like, their 2 losses are significant, but they're to 2 really good teams. But then you start to look at Fulton versus Du-Pec. That was a much closer game. I mean, Du-Pec always had control of that game, but that was a much closer game than what Du-Pec and Forreston were. So to me, is it an upset? No, but when you look at it on the papers, as far as how everything was going, I don't think people gave Fulton much of a chance in this game. I'll be honest, I had Fulton losing this game in my projections, but now it just gives us more to talk about as it shakes up what the playoff outlook will look like for both these two teams as well.
Yeah, like I said in the beginning of this, I was really impressed with Fulton being able to slow down Forreston. They held a 3-point lead for most of the second half and just really limited what Forreston could do offensively. And that was the difference in this game. Fulton was actually without their starting quarterback, Patrick Lower, who has played pretty well for them, was out. So hopefully, he gets back sooner than later. But man, Braden Dykstra stepped in and looked good. He looked the part and played really well. Brock Mason came up big with 2 receiving touchdowns. And then Ethan Van Kampen had, I believe, 96 yards. So, the names that you expect, but then Dykstra to step in there and keep things moving. That's an impressive win for Fulton. And I think it bodes well for them moving into the, playoff picture.
Well, and when I was in Lena Friday night, one of the statisticians for Lena-Winslow kept talking to me, asking me about the score of Forreston and Fulton and what my thoughts were on that matchup. And I had made the statement that, without Lower at quarterback, they were missing Damoff as well. I was like, I don't know. I think Forreston's going to roll them. They just don't have the right pieces put together. But you can't count out Jake Jones and Keegan Van Kampen. They've been doing it all season long for the Steamers. And then in that passing game, you add in Brock Mason as well. And Jake Jones was on a lot of the receiving end of those passes too. And it just shows you the type of ability that Coach Lower has to be able to change and mix and match pieces to get his machine to continue to work. And that's exactly what we saw here. Defensively, they shut Forreston down pretty much the exact same way that Du-Pec did. I mean, they held Forreston to 185 yards rushing. I think Du-Pec had Forreston at 125 yards rushing when they played. So that's been the only 2 games this year. Forreston has not rushed for over 300 yards. So that's a significant impact when you take a rushing team like Forreston that just wants to pound, and they do it with so many backs that it's hard to key in on. But I'm pretty sure that they probably looked at some film from that Du-Pec game to see how the Rivermen were able to seal the edge and shut down Forreston. And that's what it takes. You got to play that gap assignment and stay home type of defense in order to shut down a rushing attack like the Cardinals.
Yeah, job well done by Fulton. And yes, Keegan Van Kampen. I said Ethan. So it's a name we've said a lot, but apparently I didn't remember it well enough. So thank you, Kyle. You don't miss it. You never miss a thing. So you're all over it. You got me there. Yeah. And this game we talked about, Lena-Winslow going down to Du-Pec may not even affect them in the playoff hunt. They may still be that top seed. But on the flip side, this win was huge for Fulton looking at potential playoffs pairings.
Oh, definitely huge for Fulton. I mean, they're basically right at that point where they just flipped projection spots with Forreston. They went from probably being on the road at 6-3 and being the 9 seed to definitely jumping up to at least the 6 seed and hosting a first round road game, provided that they win out the remaining part of their schedule. And finish with a 7-2 record. Likewise, Forreston now at 6-3 could fall into that 8 or 9 seed. So they still have the opportunity to host a first round game, but they very well could have just lost that first round game and go on the road as well.
And I tell you what, you start talking about Fulton and Forreston. I don't care where you're going to play them. I don't think I want to see either one of those teams if I'm a 1A school. I mean, there's potential for Fulton to be a 2-loss team, and their losses are to Du-Pec and Lena-Winslow. You talk about being battle tested. That's it. That's what you join the NUIC for, is to be tested like that. There's potential there for some, good runs depending on who they run into, which, in 1A could end up being Lena-Winslow again. But, there's some good football coming in the playoffs on this northern side of the state. No shock there.
Yeah, the North bracket's definitely going to have some interesting matchups. I'm excited to see how it all breaks down. I'm really excited to put my projections together just this week because, when we go into weeks 8 and especially going into week 9, that playoff picture just gets much more clear. It becomes more accurate, and it's a lot of fun to start saying, hey, here's where we're at. This is where we're going to go. You can start pinning down potential opponents. So it makes it a lot of fun.
Yeah, going through a few other scores in the Northwest Upstate Illini from the 11-man ranks. Galena gets the 20-0 win over Dakota. So that puts them at 4 wins. So they have Du-Pec and East Dubuque left. So Galena now sitting at 4-3, hoping to get one more to get that 5th win. You also had East Dubuque gets the win 50-15 over Eastland Pearl City. Kyle, when we look at Galena with a potential 5 wins, it makes me think about the potential for a 4-5 team to get in the playoffs. Do you have you looked ahead? Do you see 1A or smaller school teams getting in at 4-5 potentially?
Right now, the best bet for 1A football teams to get in at 4-5 would be Tuscola, provided that they can come back from their COVID protocols these past 2 weeks, and they have to win weeks 8 and 9 in order to do. Some of these other schools, though, unless COVID rears its head in some of these other programs, I don't think they're going to have enough playoff points to quite make it. Right now I'm looking at, you got to be over 30 playoff points going into week 7, and you're going to have to come in with anywhere from 50 to 53 playoff points to make it into the playoffs as a 4-5. And I'm telling you, there's a lot of those Chicago Catholic League schools that we're looking at, such as a Bishop McNamara, potentially a Montini, although Montini's going to have a hard road ahead of them as well. Those schools have those playoff points. They have the schedules against powerhouse programs that have the wins that build up those playoff points to make it happen. So I don't see any of our area teams getting in at 4-5 unless something drastic really rears its head here in the last 2 weeks.
All right, sounds good. The last score, a Saturday game, Stockton goes on the road in a non-conference win over Fieldcrest, 63-6. Kyle, I mean, Stockton has shown some things this year, but they've struggled a little bit too. But man, this one's got to feel good to go on the road. I know Fieldcrest is struggling, but in years past, this is a good Fieldcrest program. You go on the road to a bigger school and you just rout them. I mean, that's a nice win for Stockton.
It's a huge momentum win for Stockton. I mean, and it's kind of funny. It goes back to what we were just talking about earlier with small schools, 1A, 2A versus 3A schools, whatnot. I mean, this is Stockton going up against a Fieldcrest team that when the last time we had playoffs, Fieldcrest was in the 2A semifinals. This past spring, they had a Winnebago team that plays in the Big Northern Conference against 3A, 4A teams. So there's just more points to make that. It doesn't matter what your classification is. You just got to show up and play the game. And Stockton did that, and very excitedly so. I mean, it's unfortunate to see Fieldcrest in the state that they're in. Obviously, we all know that their coach, Coach Neiman, left and went to DeKalb, and so now they're under a new coach. And obviously, with COVID, a lot of schools have had issues getting players to come back out or other items to that effect. And overall, the Heart of Illinois Conference in itself, we've seen quite a drop off outside of probably Tri-Valley. The rest of the teams have kind of fallen off from what we're used to seeing over the past few years in that conference. So hopefully all those teams can get some good bounce back wins. But hats off to Coach Lightson and the Blackhawks just going in there and taking care of business and getting that big win.
Yeah, that was impressive. That really stuck out to me when I was scanning Twitter on Saturday afternoon. Hey, how about we jump into the 8-man ranks real quick here, talking some 8-man NUIC football. And man, we've said it for the last 3 or 4 weeks. This 8-man division is going to be exciting to watch from a Northwest Upstate Illini perspective because these teams look really good. And Kyle, is there any team right now that's hotter than Milledgeville?
Not that I can think of.
Yeah,
no.
yeah.
Obviously, you take a look at Milledgeville's 2 closest games. They were both to NUIC opponents. They lost to Polo in week 1, 40-38. They beat Amboy in week 2, 24-12. Outside of that, it has been a rocking time in Milledgeville, and they're putting up yards in any which way possible. And I think it really shows to what Coach Roble has done with him and his staff there at Milledgeville. Obviously, you take a look at that week 1 loss to Polo. A lot of people are like, well, Polo, it's Polo. They're the defending state champs. Well, you got to remember, that was also Milledgeville's very first 8-man game ever. You got the right staff in place with Coach Roble and his guys that they are starting to make those adjustments probably faster than a lot of other schools. And they're really grasping the 8-man concepts. And they're taking a lot of things from 11-man football that they utilize and rolling them over into 8-man. I mean, you're seeing a lot of play action fakes. You're seeing a lot of QB keepers. And they're running a lot of bootlegs, getting Connor and I out into the open field on that bootleg so he can either A, find an open receiver, or B, take off. And then they're just able to run the ball as well. And they're getting a lot of success doing that. They're not a very big team, but they are extremely fast. And that speed is showing its course in the 8-man game.
Yeah, you pointed out the great point. I think that when Milledgeville lost in week 1, then it was like, well, they got a loss on their schedule, and you kind of, not forgot about them, but everybody was talking about Orangeville and Polo and Aquin. And it was like, well, Milledgeville's still here, and they only lost by 2 to Polo. And now, coming away with the big win this week over Aquin. The final score, it was 48-28. Other scores, Orangeville, huge win. They still look good. 70-8 over River Ridge. Polo, 50-0 over Peoria Heights. So all these teams, they're just, they're setting themselves up for really good success in the 8-man postseason. And I was very happy that you corrected me that they don't separate the state. They just go 1 through 16. That's great for these schools. So hopefully we can get an NUIC, Super Bowl in the state championship, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting to say the least. It would be cool to see an all NUIC state championship game when we hit Monmouth College here in November for that. But there are some really impressive teams that had some early season losses, either due to COVID numbers, due to injuries, that kind of got overlooked. And I wouldn't count those teams out yet. I mean, St. Thomas More has a heck of a team there. We know Decatur Lutheran's got a really tough team. West Central's finally back to full health. Their 2 losses are both to NUIC opponents, Amboy and Aquin, but they were missing 4 to 5 starters in both those games. So now that they're fully healthy, it's going to be exciting to see what West Central can do as they hit the playoffs.
Yeah, that was a team that was very hyped coming into the year, and you saw their tough losses. But yeah, I think the more you know about their injuries makes you wonder if they could get back to full strength, what they could do. I love it. It's going to be a lot of fun. The 8-man ranks, I think, is going to be really fun football to follow over the next month and a half or so. Well, Kyle, that kind of wraps it up. But before I let you go, let's break the big news here. Let's roll out the big announcement, October 23rd. Let people know where they need to be and what they need to be watching.
Yeah, absolutely. So, October 23rd, we're going to do our playoff show. We're going to start at 7:00. We're going to go through probable matchups that we see between 8-man through Class 3A, break down some of those matchups a little bit. Then we're going to roll out what the actual playoff brackets are as they get released. And then we're going to go through and start talking about what those real matchups are going to look like and kind of how we see that playing out. We got a good host of characters coming along, yourself included. I have one of our co-founders, Shane Cleaver, joining us, former Orangeville head coach. Jay Doyle is going to be with us. And then we got our Three Rivers super fan, Greg Pruis, joining us as well. So it's going to be a lot of fun, a lot of different concepts to talk about, different areas of coverage. And I talked to Greg Pruis this morning, We're already tapping into our friends out on the east side and the southeast side of the state to get more information. So we actually have a lot of credibility in our playoff show and what we present. It's going to be a lot of fun. A lot of people tend to join in across the state. We've noticed that. It's a YouTube live video, so it's YouTube live. It'll be youtube.com with the /NUIC football. And we'll get it put out there. We'll copy View from the West on it as well. That way we can get as much promotion behind it as we can.
I love it. Yeah, I appreciate the invite. I'm really excited to get out there and kind of break down the playoff pairings, live as they're being announced, and some fun banter with you guys, and it'll be a good time for sure. So like everybody, let everybody know, October 23rd, that's the night of the playoff pairings, 7:00 on YouTube, NUIC football. We'll be going live. I'm headed into the heart of the Northwest Upstate Illini. Couldn't be more excited, man.
Yeah, I'm excited. It's always a fun time getting a lot of different topics going and being able to put a group of people together that have a lot of knowledge across different platforms across the state is going to be great.
Awesome. Well, Kyle, thank you so much for joining me. We're going to transition to those listening who want to hear Western Big Six, Three Rivers, Lincoln Trail Conference. Me and Mitch are going to break it all down. I'm joined now by the usual suspect on View from the West pod, my co-host, Mitch Stormer. Mitch, we started with the NUIC, but me and you got to break down the Western Big Six, the Three Rivers Athletic Conference, and the Lincoln Trail. We both agreed that we should start in the NUIC because that Lee-Win Du-Pec game was the de facto conference championship. But when you look ahead at the rest of the conferences we're about to talk about, Week 8 features a de facto conference championship game for all three of them, for the Lincoln Trail, for the Three Rivers, and the Western Big Six. So there's a lot of great football coming up in Week 8. Mitch, welcome back. Let's start in the Western Big Six. Sterling knocks off Rock Island 56-35. This was a game that you watched on Friday night. So, give me your impressions. What did you see in this one?
Yeah, and by no offense to either of these teams, but I was planning on watching that Lena-Winslow Du-Pec game. Seemingly some technical difficulties at Lena with the equipment, or at least that's what the error message said. But by default, yes, this was the game that I watched this weekend. It was certainly a big game. Not to take anything away from this game itself, because it was a very important game for both teams. Obviously, Sterling. With that matchup coming up that we'll talk about with Moline, it was their kind of real one big test before their main objective in winning the conference title, and for Rocky as they try and get that fifth win. So this was a really important game, and I'm really glad that I watched it.
Yeah, well, let's start breaking down a little bit of the game action here. Quintarian Brooks takes the opening kickoff, 87 yards for a touchdown. Mitch, he almost broke a huge gainer on the opening kickoff against Galesburg a week ago. Man, this kid is a weapon on the offensive side of the ball, but in special teams as well. He can really flip a field for Rock Island. So they're immediately on the board. But then, man, immediately it becomes Sterling's ball game. They scored touchdowns on 5 of their next 6 drives, all on the ground. So that ground attack from Sterling just punishing Rock Island. Rock Island had 2 fumbles that led to 14 points for Sterling before halftime. At the break, the Golden Warriors had 261 yards on the ground, 157 of them coming from junior running back Antonio Tablante. That's a name we've called out week in, week out. That kid continues to get the job done. He's going to be a key piece next week and looking down the road for this team if they want to have success in the playoffs. Rock Island would get 2 touchdowns from Xavier George and then 1 from Marion Anderson. That would cut the score to 48-35 in the fourth quarter. But that's as close as the Rocks would get. Sterling finishes off the game 401 yards rushing, 210 from Tablante. So just a great effort from the Golden Warriors. Marion Anderson, who I just referenced, the senior receiver, had 3 touchdowns on 6 catches, 69 yards. 2 of the 3 touchdowns were 20-plus yards out. So he also is a weapon for that Rock Island team. Get this, Mitch. Sterling has not lost a conference road game since joining the Big Six. So they continue to get the job done on the road, especially in this case, but it really sets themselves up next week for a big matchup against Moline. Mitch, in watching the game, what did you see from Sterling? What impressed you?
Yeah, like you referenced, they scored on 5 of their first 6 drives, and really it was by committee. Obviously, Antonio Tablante, deservedly so, got a lot of the credit and got most of the stats because he really looked good in the first half. But and I could be misremembering some of the games that they've played this year, but they almost seem like they're at full strength, right? And that's ironic because I'll get to that in a second. But when you have Drew Kested, when you have AJ Kested, when you have Carter Ryan, and you have Antonio Tablante all kind of firing, they really were in this first half, because I think it was 41-21 at half. So you saw what that Golden Warrior offense can do when they do have all those key players working. Now, when they came up for the second half, that kind of all went away just little by little. Tablante didn't come out in the first series, and the Jim Spencer and the boys didn't really speculate as to why. It seemed like he might have been nursing an ankle injury. Maybe they were just saving him. But he had to come back into the game because of injuries to some of the other players on the Sterling roster. So I don't know if that was part of the plan or if this is how it worked out. But that would be one of my concerns as we look forward to this Moline game. Is how healthy will Sterling be? Again, I don't want to speculate. I don't want to make it seem like maybe they were serious injuries, because maybe they weren't. But the other one to me, and maybe the bigger one, is that I'm not remembering Sterling's schedule off the top of my head for the most part at the moment. But in watching this game, Rocky really exposed them a little bit. There were some holes in that Sterling defense. There was 2 Marion Anderson touchdowns that were pretty identical. They were just post routes over the middle, and he was wide open. Easy pitch and catch for Eli Reese. And so with the way Moline has been playing on the offensive side of the ball, I'm sure they're going to take notes from this game. So, a great win for Sterling. Nothing to, they get that 6th win. So I don't think there's any question that they were going to go to the playoffs. But they do get that important 6th win. They do, get a big win, not looking ahead to the Moline game. But my 2 concerns are they going to be at full strength going into that game? And can they shore up those holes on defense? Because Moline's a team that's really going to make you work on both sides of the field.
Yeah, I think when you look back at their schedule, in week 1, they beat Lake Villa 31-9. And that's a Lake Villa team that has gone on. They're now at 4-2. I'm not sure what they did in this past week. So according to IHSA, they're now at 4-2, but they've been putting up a lot of points. They lost to Lombard Montini, but they only gave up 17. And
right.
Sure, I don't know that you want to give them credit in a loss, but Montini's a great program who puts up a lot of points. And for the most part, you kind of kept them in check for a lot of that game. From there, though, Galesburg, they gave up some points late, they gave up some points early and then had to come back in that one. So they still got the job done. Alleman, Geneseo, and then I think maybe the Quincy game, Alleman, Geneseo, they only gave up 7. That was 7 to Alleman late in the game when that game was over. Geneseo, they blanked them. Quincy, they gave up 18. So their defense has been solid. But I think that Rocky offense is, high powered, and the Moline offense is certainly high powered. So these will be the tests. I mean, these 2 weeks right here will be big tests for them. As far as the injuries, they took it. I mean, they took a pretty rough game against Rock Island, because Carter Ryan left the game with an injury. AJ Kested left the game with an injury. Drew Kested left the game with an injury. And as you referenced, Tablante was also out for a little while with an injury. So again, like you referenced, I don't want to speculate on injuries. That's not what we're here to do. But it has to be referenced at some point, because that is so many significant pieces of what this team did so well on the offensive side of the ball. But a little bit, if you're talking Carter Ryan, who's doing it on both sides of the ball, offense and defense. So yeah, I hate talking about injuries, but it is a fact, and it is a reality that it will potentially have an impact on the game next week against Moline. So, Mitch, let's go down the road. We'll break down that game in a few minutes, but let's go down the road a little bit here. Moline gets the win 27-0 over Galesburg. man, this Moline defense, they just continue to get the job done. That is now 17 straight scoreless quarters for the Moline defense. They've outscored opponents 187-0 in the last 4 weeks. So Brian Stocking, stat guru with WQAD, busted out 4 consecutive shutouts for the first time since 1950 for the Maroons.
Unreal.
So just a great effort all the way around from Moline. Overall, on the offensive side of the ball, they turn out 439 yards of total offense, 27 first downs, 365 of those yards on the ground. So I think we've talked a lot about, I think preseason and last year, we talked a lot about how dynamic Alec Ponder and Matthew Bailey can be in this offense. But I think what's really impressed me, and maybe it's a product of the scores that they've had, they haven't needed to throw the ball as much because they've built up leads and they've been shutting out the opposing offenses. So their offensive rushing game has really become something to watch out for. So this is a really balanced team, I think, moving down the way into the playoffs, which could pay big dividends when you start talking postseason football.
Yeah, when you're talking 365 rushing yards and 27 first downs, that's only going to benefit your defense too, because that's keeping them off the field. That's controlling the clock. And yeah, you're not putting it in the ball in the air if you don't have to, because no one's going to, or at least in this case, Galesburg wasn't stopping their run game. So yeah, it's good to have that in your pocket, to have a ground game and then to still have a viable passing game. Because even in this game where they didn't pass a whole lot, Alec Ponder was still effective, 6-11 for 74 yards and a touchdown. And they just controlled the clock, and it's what they've proven that they've done. I think for Galesburg, they were threatening and maybe got into the Moline side of the half of the field, but the defense just shored up and they kept that streak alive. So just really incredibly impressive and stuff like you referenced, and like Stock said, that's the first time in what's the math there, 71 years.
Yeah. Yep.
So just really, really fun to see here with Moline.
Yeah, let's give a little credit to the guys running the ball. Pablo Perez, 115 yards. Mason Woods, 51 yards and a touchdown. Gavin Grace with 2 touchdowns. He's a name we've called out quite a bit. And hey, if we're going to shout out this defense for pitching another shutout, let's talk about Moline's junior lineman, Caleb Singleton, a pair of fumble recoveries and a pair of tackles for loss totaling -6 yards. So, there you go. Great job from Singleton and the rest of the crew on that Moline defense. Mitch, because we're right here with Moline and Sterling right off the top, let's jump right into this game a little bit and talk about it.
Yeah.
Man, for being identical 6-1 overall records, 5-0 in conference, it does feel like, from what we've just talked about with both teams, man, they're coming at it from completely different areas here. I mean, we're worried about, is Sterling banged up, and can they shore some things up on defense? And for the Moline side, they've just played so well for the last 4 weeks. It's just hard to see. It's hard to figure out, how does the team stop them? So I'm not saying anything about a prediction in the game. I'm just saying they seem to be coming at it from different areas, correct? From different vantage points.
Yeah. I would certainly agree with that. Two teams that obviously are strengthened by their defense. Moline, just what more can you say about the shutout streak that they've been doing in this conference? Because it's one thing to do it, and it's another thing to do it in the Western Big Six. And then, as we said too, if Sterling is healthy, it's a very, very good attack. And so you have 2 Goliaths really going at it for, I would say, and I think you would too. This will decide the Western Big Six. I don't know if it's the official designation that this game is the championship game, because anything can happen in week 9. But I think with Rocky losing, that kind of makes this the actual championship game. But yeah, who's going to break first? Who's going to get the better of their equals? Sterling's offense against Moline's defense, Moline's offense against Sterling's defense. So this will be a heavyweight bout, and it's exciting that they're both undefeated. two teams that probably at the beginning of the season that we thought would be there. Sterling was obviously pretty strong in the spring. I think Moline was 3-2, 3-3. I think they probably took advantage of kind of mixing some things up more, maybe trying some new players out in the spring more than maybe some other teams. And we knew that they would bounce back. So really exciting to see if Sterling can repeat as champs or if Moline can take the crown.
Yeah. And, on the Sterling side of things, obviously, I think we talk about injuries here. And yes, there are some names in there that could be significant. But at the same time, it's by no means doom and gloom for Sterling here when we're talking about these players, because let's talk about the names we called out in the spring that were running the ball. And Antonio Tablante wasn't necessarily one of those names. And now he is. He's the next man that has stepped up. So you've seen it repeatedly from this program that, for example, Cale Ryan was an impact player a year ago, and he's hurt. He's out for this fall season. They've had guys step up in his place. So this Sterling team, led by John Schlemmer, they're well coached and they're put in positions to win football games, and they have talented football players going down through the ranks. And there's the next man up mentality exists. You hope it exists in every program, but you've really seen it in this Sterling program over the years. I mean, this is not a flash in the pan program. They've been good for years upon years now, going back, 10 years even. So that's where I really feel like a little bit of a strength amongst adversity lies for Sterling. On the other side, Moline is very well coached. Mike Morrissey has this team firing on all cylinders. And it's interesting, again, looking back at the spring, this was a team that had a lot of question marks. And I think that Mike realized that the spring was going to be a learning curve for this team. And they learned on the job. They learned in real football games. They were in the spring, but it was real game play. And then come this fall, they were ready to go. And you've really seen it play out, especially in the last 4 weeks. This team has just been playing as good of football as any team we've seen that we've covered in this area. I mean, Moline is really on top of it. So this sets itself up. This is exactly what you want out of the Western Big Six championship game. It's exactly what you want. So I think that's exciting from that standpoint. So, and it's certainly a lot to talk about.
Yeah. And it's at Sterling. So you, another maybe thing that kind of plays into their hand because it's always an advantage to play at home. So, maybe not the biggest indicator of who, is going to win by any means, but certainly an advantage to have that game at home.
Oh, and you got to know, that Sterling crowd is going to be all over it. That's a great environment. Maybe not as great when you're the opposing team, but that's that home field advantage. I agree. I think that is a big advantage.
Yeah. And also, while we're at it, going back to watching the Sterling Rocky game, let me just shout out Golden Warrior TV because I would be hard pressed to find another school that one presents a better product, or two is as dedicated to presenting a good product as Sterling is, and not to take away from any of the local guys because you can only control the factors that you can. But everything from that game presentation to I turned the game on right at 7, and I don't know what time the kickoff was supposed to be, or if they were running late or whatever. But they had a pregame show, almost pre-taped pregame show where Jim Spencer was talking to defensive coordinator Mike LeMay, and then just the graphics packages, the starting lineups, the commercials with Arthur's Deli. I've never been more homesick in my life. So just a shout out to them because that presentation is really special for high school and certainly in our area, something that's pretty rare.
So you're saying that I need to figure out a way to get like an Arthur's Deli care package sent to you? Is that what we're working on here?
Yeah, I need like one of those freezer dry cooler things with about 10 number 4s, and the potatoes wouldn't work. I think we can make it work with the sandwiches, but yeah, that commercial came on like 4 or 5 times, and it just I had to look away.
Yep, I totally agree. Yeah, what Jim Spencer and Ging and what those guys do out there, it's a great product, and I really, when I'm at home on a Friday, I really enjoy watching it. So glad you got to take it in on a Friday night. It is a ton of fun.
I'll be doing it again. So yeah.
There you go. There you go. All right, let's move along to other games in the Western Big Six. United Township gets back in the winning track. They win 48-7 over Alleman. Lauren Arrington rushed for a game-high 158 yards, 3 touchdowns. He had a run for 53 yards, a run for 42 yards on touchdowns on consecutive carries in the second quarter. So have a quarter there, Lauren Arrington. The game was scoreless midway. Go ahead, Mitch.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to say, because the game was scoreless up until that point. He scores, and then I don't remember if Alleman turned the ball over, if they got it after a punt or what it was, and then he scored again. So that really jump started this Panther offense after a tough battle for about a quarter and a half.
Yeah, well, great for Nick Welch and the Panthers to get back on the winning side of things here. So they move to 4-3 on the season. So they are now still in the hunt for playoff positioning. So every game from here on out is critical for the Panthers.
Yeah, and just on the Alleman side, we there's been a lot of talk about them. You certainly posed a question, or it wasn't you. I'm sorry, it wasn't you. It was James Taylor who posed a question, and we can revisit that a different time. But there was also a great article this week. I've mentioned it before. Jackson Stone of the QC Times and the Argus, kind of talking about the Alleman program and where they were in the spring, because they were 3-3 in the spring. Yeah. And then a lot of turnover, both in players and coaching staff over the summer. At one time, this is a program that had 12 kids on the field in summer practice. And they've got kids who have never played football before, or are out for the first time, or out for the first time in a long time. And in the article, it just describes their attitude and how just upbeat it is, and how, there's no fight in these guys. They've gotten better every single week. The scoreboard isn't going to show that. The wins and losses aren't going to show that. But they held UT scoreless for a quarter and a half, and they end up scoring before the game. So, I don't know if Alleman gets a win this year, but a lot of credit to that program, because they are making the most of a tough situation.
Yeah, Matt Randazzo mentioned it on Friday night. I think that was his first game he started at, and he mentioned it in the highlights. Like, Alleman's playing better. They're improving each week, and it's hard to see in the final score. But forget that at this point. I mean, Don't worry about that. Yeah, credit to these kids for battling through it, because this is not a situation that any of them certainly want to be in. And, nobody wants to find themselves in this situation. So they're fighting through it, and they're trying to make things work. And you just hope for a program that is as proud as Alleman is, that it, you can find a way to kind of flip the script a little bit. And, it's one bad year, and hopefully things will turn around and they can get, some positive momentum. Cause I think it's too quick on the trigger to say, well, they're just done. They can't do it anymore. I think just pause a minute, take a step back.
Also, I thought I was going to be able to do it, but you did. But congrats on meeting our quota of saying, as Dazzo said in the reaction pod. I thought I would get it in somewhere, but you beat me to it. So congrats.
He's not going to want to. He's not going to want to hear that. Oh,
and I'm glad.
Actually, he's going to want to hear that. But
shout out.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's move right along from that, because all right. Quincy gets the win over Geneseo 23-22. Great game in this one. Quincy led 16-0 at the half. But man, the Maple Leafs were not done. They were not going to give up at Quincy on this road trip. They get on the board in the third quarter. Jacob Weinzerl, a name we've called out a lot, finds Paydirt from 5 yards out. He would get the 2-point conversion to bring it to 16-8. Quincy would answer. Geneseo responds right back. Will Taylor for 22 yards. Geneseo back to within 7 with 2 minutes left in the third quarter. Under 5 minutes to play, AJ Weller finds Weinzerl again from 35 yards. Quincy does hang on to the 23-22 lead at that point. That's with just under 5 minutes left in the game. Maple Leafs get a big defensive stop on 4th down and 5 at the 5-yard line. The Leafs then had 95 yards on no timeouts with about 2.5 minutes left to go. They get down, but they can't get into scoring position, and they run out of time. They can't pull this one off. But Mitch, We debated it a little bit on the Instant Reacts podcast.
Yeah.
Geneseo with about 5 minutes, little under 5 minutes left in the game. They go for 2 on the road. What are your thoughts on that?
That's the absolute right call.
Okay, see, we all agree except for Stocking. Go figure.
Yeah. He probably has a conversion rate of success or something, but it's just, one, you're on the road and that's what you want to do. 2, you want to put your players in a position to win the game. I don't know if there was any, conversation, wondering if they wanted to go for it or not, but I'm sure that they would have all said, yes, let's do it. And really from Geneseo's standpoint, you're sitting there with 3 wins. You got to do everything that you can to try and get to 4. So yeah, it's an absolute right call. Don't pin it on a kicker a team that we've talked about. I think their kicker has missed some time. So why even risk trying to risk just getting a tie when you can go for the win? And this is just, what you live with in the game in that situation. So, kudos to both teams. This was a really good game. Kudos to Geneseo for coming back and not having any quit, and for Quincy to hang on.
Yeah, I love the idea of going for that because you're on the road, like you said, and you're down 16-0 at half. You fight back, and you got one play that can give you the lead in that game. Yep. And almost steal that victory if it's possible. I know there was still 4+ minutes left, but trust in your defense, which Geneseo could. And yeah, go for it in that situation. I agree. Yep. The Leafs fall short. Credit to Quincy. They got a young group that's playing well. They've showed some flashes of some really good football. This Quincy and Geneseo teams seem like they're going to be going back and forth for the next 3 or 4 years. They just got a lot of talent that's younger, that's, going to be there for a while. Same with United Township. We've talked about a lot of their younger talent has shown flashes of it. I think they'll be in the mix as well. So Mitch, we've talked about, the games that were in week 7. That leaves Moline and Sterling sitting there undefeated in conference play, 6-1 overall. Rock Island sits alone at 3rd place at 3-2 in the conference. And then you have Quincy, United Township, Galesburg, all sitting at 2-3. With Geneseo and Alleman being at 7-8. So let's look into week 8. We already talked about it. Moline at Sterling, United Township at Galesburg, Rock Island at Geneseo, and Alleman at Quincy. So when you start looking through these games, I'll default to you first. What stands out to you? Obviously, Moline, Sterling. Let's go the rest. What else stands out to you?
I'll go with UT and Galesburg here. Both teams not having the season that I think that they wanted to for 2 very different reasons. And UT still has a shot at the playoffs. They're at 4 wins now. So if they beat Galesburg, and they can get at least the qualifying win. But as we've said many times before, Galesburg is a heck of a lot better than 2-5. It's unfortunate for them because they've lost in some really just heartbreaking ways, with things just not going their way. So I'm intrigued by that more so. Can UT get another win? Can they get that qualifying 5th win? Same thing with Rock Island. Can they get their 5th win and get qualifying? Can the Western Big Six get 4 teams into the playoffs? I know Quincy has 3 wins. I don't know if they get to 5, but I think this team has at least 3 for sure going in, possibly 4. And speaking of Quincy, can they get that win over Alleman? How will Alleman look? So there's, even though Moline and Sterling are going to dominate the headlines this week, and deservedly so, because it's going to determine the title. Still some intriguing matchups left with 2 weeks left.
Yeah, I think when you start looking at United Township and Galesburg, we've talked a lot about the talent that Galesburg has, and it hasn't necessarily materialized. I'm sure that they're not satisfied with the record that they have, but on the flip side, you look at United Township, they're sitting at 4-3. United Township was a team we talked a lot about going into the year. We talked especially a lot about them after they came away with the win against Geneseo to open conference play. And then if I'm being honest, like some of the results had them kind of fall off our radar a little bit, where they weren't necessarily the top marquee name we were talking about week in and week out. But now sitting at 4-3 to the Panthers, here's your shot. Go out to Galesburg, win this one, get that 5th win. You know, let's see it. I really think there's the talent there. Like, we've talked a lot about it. But if you're going to go to Galesburg, you got to earn it, because this Galesburg team is good. And man, that motivation for Galesburg to knock them off, man, you know it's there. You know, play that spoiler.
Yeah. And again, not to say that UT can't do it in week 9, but they do host Sterling. So this is almost kind of a must win, a game for UT if they want to have a shot at the playoffs. Cause I don't know what happens. Anything can happen. We saw it certainly happen in the spring. But just get that 5th win, just, take the pressure off you a little bit. Because you don't want, I guess that's how I want to say it. You don't want your playoff hopes clinging on a game against Sterling. Win or loss, however you match up with a team, you don't want it to hang on on beating Sterling. So if they can get this win, get that 5th win, and then it's up to them. I think they would certainly have the playoff points to get in with 5 wins.
Yeah. And looking at the Rock Island Geneseo matchup, that one's also very intriguing. Rock Island going on the road to Geneseo.
Yep.
I think the question for me becomes, does Geneseo have the defensive firepower to slow down Rock Island? And immediately the question on the opposite side is, can Rock Island keep that offense moving? Can they limit their penalties, limit their own fumbles and turnovers?
Mm-hmm.
This is a game that they really could use as well, because you start talking, they want to get that 5th one, but obviously, looking at playoff seeding as well, they want to get every win they can from here on out, these last 2. So this is a game, can Rock Island bounce back? And I want to see what they can do.
Yeah. Like you said, can Rocky stop, shooting themselves in the foot a little bit? Because even in the game this week in Sterling, it was in the second quarter. They were driving. I think it was on their side, or I think it was on Sterling's end of the field. They fumbled. Carter Ryan picked it up, ran it back for a score. So, if you think Rocky would go down and score on their drive, that's a 14-point swing. And the difference in the game was 3 scores. So it makes it a completely different dynamic if that doesn't happen. So yeah, clean it up a little bit, and Rocky get that 5th win and keep moving forward.
Well, plenty to talk about in the Western Big Six, and we will certainly have a lot to break down next week. But let's move into the Three Rivers Athletic Conference from week 6. Monmouth Roseville gets the 46-6 win over Riverdale. The Titans now 6-1. They've officially locked up their first playoff berth since 2018. They're 5-0 in the Track West. They take a half-game lead over Erie Prophetstown. We'll talk about them in a minute, because that's a big one coming up. Derek Chandler scores Silas Braun to Jerome Jackson, who made a spin move to avoid 4 Ram defenders and get his way 65 yards for the touchdown. That put the Titans up at that point 25-0. CJ Johnson had a pair of touchdowns on the night. Another great performance from the Titans. Man, they're rolling right along, and they look every bit the part of being a divisional conference champion. But they got 2 games left, one big one next week we'll talk about. This Titan team looks really good, though.
Yeah, and all those highlights that you just talked about, especially that pass to Jerome Jackson, because that was really a very, very cool play. A lot of that happened, I think most of it happened in the first quarter. I think they put up 30 points in the first quarter, so this one was over early. But yeah, the names that we keep talking about, Derek Chandler and Silas Braun, have just been dynamic for this, and the defense, not taking away from the defense, but this whole team, I guess I'll just leave it at that. This whole team has really been impressive. I think we talked about it maybe a little bit, that this was maybe not a team that we expected to be in a position to win the West, win the Rock. So maybe that's on us, or maybe that's on Monmouth Roseville for really stepping up. But yeah, they have looked really, really good this season, because their only loss is to Kiwani. Is that right?
Yep, in week 1.
Okay. So yeah, they've really turned the corner from that game. And like you said, they lock up their playoff spot. Now they're trying to lock up that division win.
So credit to Jeremy Adolphson and that coaching staff. I think this was a team like we talked about with Moline. They struggled in the spring, but I think they really used that game experience, that real-time playing experience to get them where they're at now. And it's paying off. They look really good, and they're sitting at 6-1, locked in for the playoffs with a huge matchup coming up this weekend. And they also have a huge matchup down the road. They have 2 big games left. We'll get to them in a second. Mitch, let's move along. Erie Prophetstown gets the 35-12 win at Bureau Valley. Erie Prophetstown quarterback Colby Franks racked up 262 total yards, 3 touchdowns. Connor Sibley, 117 yards on 12 attempts. Mason Misfeld was the top tackler with 10 total stops. So Mason Misfeld's a guy we call out on offense, doing it on the defensive side of the ball as well. Erie Prophetstown looked really good. They grabbed a lead early in this one. Bureau Valley hung around, but ultimately the Panthers, man, they keep playing well. They're now at 5-0, along with Monmouth Roseville. So that sets up another one of those conference championship games that we talked about in the Three Rivers West. It's going to be Erie Prophetstown and Monmouth Roseville essentially battling for that divisional conference title. So that should be a good one coming up in week 8.
Yeah. Thinking back to Erie, their only losses are from their first 2 weeks. They lost by 10 to a really good Mendota team, and then they lost on a last-second field goal to St. Bede. So, 2 teams that really, kind of like we talked about with Roseville coming off that week 1 loss. Both teams here lose week 1 and have looked really good since. So it only makes sense that they are playing for this division crown. I said it in my Reacts tweet. Really looking forward to Silas Braun versus Colby Franks, 2 of the most dynamic quarterbacks that we cover. Certainly 2 of the better ones in the track. So that game is really, really gonna be. It could be a shootout. If both offenses are clicking, both defenses have shown that they're very, very good. But these are really 2 good offenses. So intrigued to see what happens in that game. That game is at Monmouth Roseville. So, I'm really, really looking forward to that.
That may be a game that I peg on Dazzle and say, this is a game I might want to maybe hang out at the whole time if I had the option to. Mitch, can we give ourselves a little credit, maybe a little pat on the back? Because way back in week 1, I know we talked about Monmouth Roseville had some pieces in place, but Kiwani really outplayed them on that one night. We said to watch for them. And then a few weeks later, we said, hey, Erie Prophetstown sitting at 0-2, but look at those 2 games they played. Really competitive against what we thought was really good football teams that have turned out to be really good football teams in Mendota and St. Bede. So we give ourselves a little credit, right? We kind of called some of that.
Yeah, I don't know if I was that early on Erie. I think it was after they beat Rock Ridge and they got to 2-2. I think that's when I said that they were going to go to the playoffs. I'm pretty sure. So, if we're going to take some credit, we did call that to make up for any things that we've been wrong about. So we'll just forget about those and focus on these.
Well, yeah, it's our podcast, so we don't bring up the things we say wrong. We only bring up.
I never said that.
That's right. We'll get right into it real quick here. Monmouth Roseville hosting Erie Prophetstown in week 8. It's like we've said, the de facto conference championship for that western side of the Three Rivers Athletic Conference. Like you talked about the dynamic athletes going up against each other. I think what I want to see is up front, the play up front. Is Erie Prophetstown as big as Monmouth Roseville? I feel like Monmouth Roseville is very experienced up front. Their line is very well played. They've done a great job with it. And I think the game that stands out to me, let's look back at the common opponent in Rock Ridge. And when you look at that Rock Ridge game, Erie Prophetstown was in a shootout with the Rockets going back and forth to the very end. Mm-hmm. And obviously we've been very impressed with the Panthers' firepower to overcome it and to beat the Rockets in that one. On the flip side, Monmouth Roseville kind of slowed down Rock Ridge and really limited what they were able to do. I don't think they didn't score much, maybe a couple touchdowns.
Yeah, it was 18-15.
Yeah. So that Monmouth Roseville defense was really able to slow down the Rockets. So that's where the intriguing matchup comes in, is can Erie Prophetstown manage to keep things going against what seems to be a tough Monmouth-Roseville defense? This matchup, I tweeted it out earlier tonight. This has the potential to be the game of the year, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I think these teams come in that evenly matched.
Yeah, I think EP has the better resume, just having played Mendota and St. Bede, because Roseville has yet to play EP, and then they end with Princeton. So maybe at this point Erie has the better resume. But I'm looking at the scores here. In all 4 of or 5 of Erie's wins, they have scored.
It's a lot. It's a lot.
I'm just double checking my math here. Yeah, they've been over 35 points in all for 5 straight weeks. I guess that would be. And Monmouth-Roseville was pretty similar outside of that Rock Ridge game. So, like I said, I think this has potential to be a shootout, even though both defenses are really good because their offenses are so good with Braun versus Franks, with Chandler versus Sibley, and with playmakers like Jerome Jackson or guys who play on both ends like Mason Misfeld. Really, really exciting matchup here.
You're talking me into this game. You're making this game seem like the one that I should be at.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I think you look at Erie Prophetstown, 55 points, 50 points, 49 points, 42 points, and then 35 points against Bureau Valley. I think the question becomes, Rock Ridge or Monmouth-Roseville passed the test against Rock Ridge. They were able to limit that offense enough to get that win. Can the Titans do it again? Because here's another high-powered offense in Erie Prophetstown. Can they do it again? That's where it comes into play for me. That should be a great game. Let's keep moving right along. Another huge win. Newman gets the 43-0 win over Spring Valley Hall. Mitch, this was a Hall team that, despite their record, we really talked up because they had played really well in 2 weeks against Mendota and Kiwani. And I don't know, maybe this week they just finally kind of ran out of gas because Newman looked really good in this one.
I don't know that it could be some of that. I think it's Newman getting back to full strength.
That's a good point. Yep.
I think Newman has finally gotten to the point where they, because we saw Marcus Williams earlier in the year. I think it was against Morrison, what he did against them. And then he was out. But yeah, this Newman team has certainly clicked this past weekend. And I think Celia brought it up. Like, this is not a team that you probably want to see in the playoffs, because the way that they play, just in general, clock management, running the ball, really bruising you up and down the field. And then if they're going to be at full strength, look out, it's not going to be easy. Kind of what we were talking about in the Western Big Six. Not saying this is a must-win game for Newman, but you've got Mendota and then Kiwani.
Yeah.
So 2 really tough games for Newman that you'd want to be full strength for, and hopefully they are, because it's going to be tough to get to that 5th win. I think that they can somewhere, but this was a good start, because this is kind of shows what they can do in that sort of situation.
Yeah, so let's break it down real quick. Newman's defense right from the start, they got 2 4th down stops and then 3 3-and-outs on Hall's first 5 possessions. In the meantime, they scored on 6 of their first 7 drives, doing a lot of their damage on the ground. So you talk about that Newman recipe for success. They suffocate you on defense and they run it down your throat. That's what Newman does well. They got back to doing that this week. Newman racked up 347 yards on the ground. They held Hall to 42 yards rushing, Mitch. Holy cow. So just, great effort from them. Marcus Williams returns from injury, had 78 yards rushing and a touchdown. Ethan Van Landuit finished with 75 yards and a touchdown. Mason Glaudell, 66 yards. He had a pair of touchdowns. So getting contributions from multiple athletes on the field, and obviously the defensive effort all the way, just complete team effort on the defensive side of the ball. Yeah, this is a Newman team that they really needed this win. But, man, it doesn't get any easier. Like you referenced, they got Mendota next week on the road, and then they're at home against Kiwani in week 9. So Mendota sitting at 5-2, and Kiwani currently sitting at 7-0. That's tough. That's 2 tough games left on your schedule. If they're going to get in, they got to earn it.
Yeah. And, maybe in both of those 2 teams, we'll talk about them in a minute because they just played each other this week. So, based off of what Mendota did this past week or what they didn't do against Kiwani, maybe there's an opening there for Newman if they can play as well as they have to grab that 5th win this week, because it's not going to get any easier with Kiwani in week 9. But yeah, Mendota's 5-2 and they're hosting that game. So but when we get to the week 8 matchups, that would probably be one that I would circle, because there is, Newman trying to get that qualifying win, Mendota trying to get that automatic win. So that would be certainly an intriguing matchup for me.
Well, let's jump right into, like you referenced, Kiwani and Mendota played each other in week 7. Kiwani gets the 56-7 win. Boilers are off to their first 7-0 start since 1943. So unbelievable.
Take that, Moline. Not 1950. We're going deeper.
That's right. 1950 was a deep stat. We're going even farther back. So credit to the Boilers and that program, Coach Swanson and everybody. I mean, this team, this community, they're on fire right now, man. They're buzzing. So Mitch, I started at Bureau Valley for the game against Erie Prophetstown. I'm on the road. I'm listening to WRMJ and getting my, my local sports fix on the road, getting some halftime scores and some updates along the way. But then I hear my phone buzz and I look down and all you say is Kiwani 42-0 second quarter. And I thought, Oh my God.
Well, yeah. And this was a game that was available on NFHS.
Yep.
And I remember I was either waiting for the Shirley Rocky game to start, or I was just flipping in general. And I turned on this game because this game was also as a Kiwani home game, and so they had a presentation as well. And I saw them score while I was watching, and it was at that point 35-0. And no offense to Kiwani, but I turned the game off right there because it was over. So a Mendota team who had not shown any signs of being slowed down that way, but Kiwani just continues to look so good this year.
So I get to the game, and like I just referenced, you had told me it was 42-0. I run in and I see the Kiwani is in a timeout, but they're in the red zone. And I thought I ran down. I thought I got to get anything I can here. So thank you to Coach Swanson. I'm sure he didn't do it just for me, but I appreciate I appreciate that he gave the handoff to lineman James Conner. The big man rumbles in. So Mitch, I get a lineman touchdown while I'm there. The team's going nuts. The crowd's going nuts. So it was fun. That was a lot of fun to get that moment. And then, from there, like I said, I pretty much missed most of the highlights. It was over by the time I got there, but another great effort from Kiwani. Will Bruno threw 3 touchdown passes in the game. That's 20 on the season. And actually, I ran into his mom when I was walking out.
Okay.
And actually, Will's little cousin was there wearing a Will Bruno shirt. So she was excited.
Look out.
And I put her on the news because Will set 2 records in the game, one for receptions or for passes in a season, and one for completions in a career. So 2 records in the same game. So credit to Will Bruno. And it was great running into his mom as I was, leaving the game. She was very excited naturally for this one. So a lot of buzz, a lot of fun for Kiwani. Not as much fun for Mendota, but man, still a lot to work on and still a lot left ahead of Mendota. This Trojans team's now at 5-2. They're still playoff eligible, so they're right there. They still have a lot in front of them.
Yeah. And we referenced it a little earlier. They play, Newman here in week 8. And then they finished with St. Bede. So we're seeing this a lot here in the track, that the team's final 2 weeks, especially for teams that are either trying to get playoff eligible or get that automatic win, really a tough road ahead. We talk about the gauntlet that is the NUIC, and for the absolute correct reasons. The track is no slouch. The state titles that Newman has, the state titles that Morrison has, the state titles that Bureau Valley has. So the NUIC gets a lot of talk, deservedly so. Don't sleep on the track, because historically this is a very good conference, and it's showing again, because they're going to get 4, 5, 6 teams maybe in the playoffs. So it's, as I've been looking through these schedules, it's just like, whoo, these last 2 weeks are really going to mean a lot for a lot of teams.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's look at one of those teams that is certainly part of that gauntlet. Princeton gets the 47-20 win over St. Bede. Mitch, we've been impressed with what St. Bede has done this year, but I got to give huge credit to Princeton. Their biggest, game plan going in was to contain as much as you can, contain and limit the damage that Tyreek Fortney can do for St. Bede. And man, they certainly accomplished that. He had 1 reception and 1 carry. So I don't know, why they weren't handing the ball off more to him if you're St. Bede, but I give credit to Princeton's defense for really blanketing him and just not letting him get open, in space.
Yeah, and this game was close. They were trading touchdowns the first couple of scores. I think it was 13-13, 14 to 14 or something early on. Maybe it's still in the first quarter, or at least early second at the very latest. But then I don't remember what that stat was that we said a couple of weeks ago about how many times Princeton scored in the 40s, but they do it again, continue to really look good. Taking it to Newman and St. Bede, with their only losses here coming to Kiwani, they are priming themselves for a really good run in 3A.
Yep. Let's look at their stats from this one. Junior running back Augie Christensen, 117 yards and 4 touchdowns. Junior Tegan Davis, 215 on 3 touchdowns, accounting for all of the Tigers scoring, 332 yards rushing. Class 3A number 8 ranked team. The Tigers now 6-1, 4-1 overall in the track East. So they've clinched a playoff bid. This was a team that we knew from the very beginning they were going to be a factor going into the playoffs. They've clinched that bid. So they're going to be in. We'll talk about their matchups down the road coming up in a minute here. Orion gets the big win, 30-0 over Morrison. So they moved to 3-4. Mitch, what's really interesting is they're obviously fighting for their playoff lives right now, sitting at 3-4. They next week have rival Sherrard, and then they have Rock Ridge in week 9. So we'll talk more about it in a minute here, but there's a lot of, like you've talked about with these last 2 weeks, a lot of intriguing matchups with just so much riding on these games and so much riding on these outcomes as far as which teams are in and which teams may not, may be out of the playoffs. But before we get into that, let's give a shout out to Orion Charger alum, Orion Charger graduate, Logan Lee, defensive lineman now for the Iowa Hawkeyes, in a game that was, on the national radar, on the scale of, nationwide discussion as far as Iowa versus Penn State. Obviously, Iowa came away with the huge win. Crazy scene in Kinnick, crazy scene in Iowa City as the Hawkeyes get the victory. Logan Lee finishes the game with a career high 7 tackles. So huge credit to him, and a shout out to a couple other former Lee Win Panthers, Isaiah Bruce and Jennings Dunker. Both represent the Iowa Hawkeyes now. So, we got some Hawkeyes from our area, and they're doing great things. The Hawkeyes, Mitch, the Hawkeyes are number 2 in the nation. It's crazy to me.
Yeah, this game was off the charts in terms of how boring it was. And so, Yeah, they're number 2 or 3, whatever they are. But
no, they're
hey,
number 2.
Look,
they're AP number 2.
All right, let's
with very little offense, but they're AP number 2. Oh, we're gonna get in a lot. We're getting a lot of trouble with Hawkeye fans here.
Yeah. I don't like the Hawkeyes, so just make it clear.
I don't either. So here we are
on the teams or on the conferences that we cover, and I don't remember what we called the track. But that could almost be like, is it the Big Ten East or the Big Ten leaders, whatever they call it now, that has like 5 of the top 10 teams? It's something like that, right?
Yeah.
Like that is not to get into college talk, but I will enjoy your ranking while it lasts.
Oh, man.
Because that's just like the track is. That's going to be a gauntlet the rest of the way out. There are so many good teams, whether they've lost already or they haven't lost, that are going to be coming up on the schedules. Obviously, with college, there's 7 weeks left or whatever it is. But similar situations. So it's just such a deep 2-division conference, that there's only spots for a few. And so you got to get through everyone else to be one of those 2. So, yeah, I would think of it that way, because I could see some similarities between those 2 conferences and the way that their seasons are playing out.
Well, Mitch, the Northwestern Wildcats have claimed the last 2 out of 3 Big Ten West championships. So yep. I'm clinging onto that as long as I can, because I'm not sure it's going to remain that way. So.
Yeah, whatever helps getting over having 50 hung on you by Nebraska. That's fine.
It doesn't help. Nothing helps. All right, Mitch, we got to move along. I can't keep talking about that. Yeah. Rock Ridge gets the 56-7 win over Sherrard. So the Rockets now sit at 4-3. They have a big crossover matchup next week at Kiwani, and then it's Orion. So like we just discussed briefly, there's a very real chance that we have Rock Ridge at 4-4 and Orion at 4-4 fighting for a playoff spot.
Yep.
So much intrigue.
If playoff football is on a completely different level. No matter if you're seeing the 1-16 matchup or whatever. Situations like this are very close in terms of like being at that game and just feeling it, being a part of that game with so much on the line. Again, 5 wins doesn't guarantee you anything. Most of the time it does. In the track, I would assume it does. I say I hope we get there, but that means heartbreak for one team. But you also want both teams to be in that position. So if that comes to fruition, that will be, like you said, a big time matchup.
And here's the thing, man, Rock Ridge, they could avoid the scary situation if they can pull off the upset at Kiwani. They have a chance here. They're sitting, they're at 4-3 right now. If they go on the road and grab what would be a huge win, at Kiwani, they could avoid the situation. But man, there's just a lot of factors at play, a lot of intrigue going into week 8 and week 9. Mitch, let's talk about it. Week 8, like we just said, Rock Ridge at Kiwani, Bureau Valley at Princeton, the Route 6 rivalry, Mitch. It's back for the first time in 23 years. Bureau Valley going on the road to Princeton. I grew up in Ottawa, right along Route 6, so I appreciate the Route 6 rivalry here. That's a lot of fun. Newman at Mendota, St. Bede at Hall. There's another nearby rivalry there for you. Erie Prophetstown at Monmouth Roseville, which we talked about. Riverdale at Morrison, and Orion at Sherrard. So, we've talked about a lot of these games, but just so much playoff implications going into these games in week 8 and week 9.
Yeah. And even on the flip side of that, I look at a Riverdale Morrison, 2 teams that really haven't had good years. Can Riverdale get their first win? Can Morrison get their second win? As much as we talk about these games that have playoff implications, the bottom of the table here, even Sherrard hosting Orion, we hope to see that those teams do well, because they, have not quit at all season. So, again, like I said, can Riverdale get their first win? Morrison get their second win? Can Sherrard get their first win? So, exciting stuff all throughout the table here.
I think the one that's interesting to me is St. Bede goes on the road to Hall. And now St. Bede did get the win at Bureau Valley, but they didn't dominate. I mean, they certainly didn't put up a ton of points. And maybe that's some credit to Bureau Valley for really limiting what they could do on offense. But we've seen this Hall team play up a little bit until this week. So that's where the question comes in. Can Hall bounce back? Can they do something at home? You know, their playoff season is over, sitting at 1-6, but can they derail what St. Bede wants to do? Or can St. Bede kind of prove to be that team and really jump back in and play really well? That matchup intrigues me a little bit. Newman at Mendota, a lot there. There's a lot there. That seems like a really even matchup for two teams that, man, they'd love to get a win to really notch a quality win late in their season. This is a big one for both teams.
Yeah. I think you said it all. What more can be said? There's just so much riding on this week. And it's only going to lead into more intrigue for week 9. So, yeah, looking forward to it.
Mitch, if I got to pick one game to go to here in the Three Rivers, where am I going?
Other than Kiwani, other than Roseville EP?
Well, no, is that it?
Yeah,
I think that's probably it.
That's the easy answer. That's for the division crown. That's the easy answer. So other than that,
if Matt Randazzo says no and he's mean to me and doesn't let me do that one,
yeah,
I sound like a whiny child. He's mean to me. He won't let me do it. If I can't go there, where am I going?
Newman Mendota, I think. I think that has the most intrigue for playoffs. Obviously, BV and Princeton is a great rivalry. But in terms of what hangs in the balance, yeah, I think Newman Mendota. Kiwani Rock Ridge a close second because Rock Ridge is certainly not out of it. But that's a tall task going to Kiwani. So I would say Newman at Mendota would be my second favorite matchup of the week here.
Yeah. I like that Rock Ridge Kiwani matchup, but I've been to Kiwani 3 times this year already. So I gotta diversify a little bit.
Well, unless you're the good luck charm, I don't know.
That's true. Well, that's true. Yeah. They've played well. Obviously they played well every week, whether I'm there or not, but yeah.
Yeah.
All right, let's jump into the Lincoln Trail Conference from week 7. Mitch, A-Town, they were off in week 6. They get back on, they had a forfeit win due to COVID. They get back on the field now against Princeville. They win 18-7 in this one to remain unbeaten on the year. They're now 7-0. The Princes actually did score first in this one, but that's all they'd get all night. A-Town wins 18-7 like we referenced. And actually, Easton Schischler was out in this one for the Tornadoes. In steps Parker Stone King, usually a wide receiver, had never taken a snap in a game at quarterback. He gets pegged as the quarterback in practice earlier in the week. And man, he gets the job done. They did get off to a slow start. Like I said, they were trailing 7-6 at halftime, but Stone King would connect with Parker Darst for a 9-yard touchdown. That gave the Tornadoes a 12-7 lead. Darst ran for 97 yards in the game as well. Stone King completes 9 of 20 for 209 yards, 2 touchdowns. He also had a 2-yard touchdown run. He leads them to victory, 18-7. So just a great effort from a senior to step in wherever you're needed, like other duties as assigned. You're a wide receiver, but hey, we need you here. So great job from him.
Yeah, he also captains the all-name team, Parker Stone King, so double duty. But, we saw with Princeton, with Tegan Davis, where you have teams that, have to replace, or I should say they play a different position and have to, come into a new role. Regardless of the situation, obviously Tegan Davis has been the quarterback for Princeton all season. This might have been a one-off thing, or he's just the emergency QB. But a typical Princeville game, a low-scoring game where they kind of slow things down against their opponents. So A-Town proves here that they can, win both ways. We've seen them win in blowout fashion. We've seen them kind of grind it out here now. Even with a new quarterback, they were able to grind it out. So, A-Town gets to 7-0 and big one in the week that we're going to talk about here in a minute.
Yeah, well, let's move right along to Knoxville getting the 41-22 win over Illini West. Mitch, this Knoxville offense, we talk about it every single week.
Yep.
But they just keep putting up numbers that are worth talking about.
Yeah.
495 yards of total offense. This Blue Bullets team, they have so many weapons, and they're just putting up the points, and they look great so far, sitting at 7-0.
Yeah, good to see them go out of conference and play, historically a good Illini West team. I think they're 4-3 or 3-4 on the season, something like that. So, but not to take away from what type of program that they are. So, but yeah, this Knoxville team is a lot of fun to watch and to read about, as they are newcomers to the LTC and they're really making their presence known. So the Blue Bullets once again show that they are by committee a dominant force to reckon with.
Well, let's read through some of the committee. We've talked about them before. These are names that you'll be familiar with if you've heard us talk Knoxville. Peyton Hankins, 13 carries, 208 yards, 2 touchdowns. He had one from 80, one from 58. He's now over 1,200 yards on the season. And now keep in mind, that includes a forfeit win over Mercer County.
Mm-hmm.
So they haven't even played. They've only played 6 games technically on the field.
Right.
So over 1,200 yards in 6 games. Kellen McClay, 12 carries, 103 yards, 2 touchdowns. Garrett Larson, 12 for 99 and 2 touchdowns. On the defensive side, let's give some credit to the Blue Bullets. Yeah. They're winning games. They're getting it done on defense as well. Carson Wallace, 2 interceptions on defense. He's now got 5 on the year. So big time effort from Wallace and the defensive side for the Blue Bullets. They look like a complete team, and they look like a team that is ready for a playoff run.
Yeah, this is in every single game that they've played this year, outside of the forfeit win against Mercer County. They had 41 in this win. That was their lowest point total of the year.
Wow. Yeah.
And they've only they allowed 26 points against Kiwani and Wethersfield 2 weeks ago, but that was their highest defensive output. So, yeah, a complete team here. And they're going to go up against an A-Town team that's a very, very good offensive team. So, we don't know about the injuries there, if Stone King's going to play again for them. But yeah, this is going to be a good battle. A-Town only allows something like 10 points a game, so that they've never been scored on. They've only allowed 14. That's the highest that they've allowed. So can they be the answer that no one seems to have yet for the Blue Bullet offense? On the other side of that, can Knoxville's defense continue to play that they have and stop a really good tornado offense? So like we've talked about for this duration of this show with some of the matchups that we have this week, add this one to the list, because not only is it a game between 2 really, really good teams, also for the LTC crown. Yeah,
longtime rivals, Knoxville and Abingdon Avon. They've been doing battle for years and years and years. This is a historic rivalry when you talk about, the longest running rivalries in the state of Illinois. And man, they couldn't have picked a better time to meet up in week 8 with the conference crown on the line. Like we've talked about all year, both the newcomers to the Lincoln Trail Conference, but here they sit and they're doing battle in what is the conference championship in week 8. Mitch, I think it's easy to look at Knoxville's offense, but man, that Abingdon Avon defense, when I really started looking through their schedule and looking at the scores, the point totals, they have not allowed very much any week. It's less than 2 scores.
Yep. So again, this is where you see the unstoppable force, meeting an immovable object. So
that is such an old school WWF reference that I love it.
Yeah. I'm telling on myself with my age too. So, but that's what you want. Do we know, is Knoxville in 2A or 3A?
I believe Knoxville will be a 2A team.
Okay. That is an incredibly tough 2A team to have to play. Because is A-Town 1?
Yeah, A-Town will be 1A, I believe.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So, yeah. So not only does this obviously have the LTC crown on the line, but really good experience for both of these teams, having both automatically qualified for the playoffs, both which I would predict can make a significant run, especially A-Town in 1A, as long as they don't run into a Lee win or a Forreston early, if they run into them in the quarterfinals or whatever you may be. But and certainly Knoxville in 2A as well. So these are two teams that I'm certainly looking forward to watching this week, but also in the next, what they would hope the next 6 or 7.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I really want to see, head coach Rick Quinn and the Abingdon Avon Tornadoes have been a successful program. They've had their ups and downs, but man, they were really good several years ago, and now they seem to be back. And I think this is a huge test for them. And regardless of the outcome, you're going up against a very good 2A Knoxville program. As a 1A school, what can you do against them? And man, you're going to be battle tested going into the playoffs. So there's really, the downside is if you don't win the game, you're not the conference champion. But at the end of the day, there's bigger goals, other goals down the road. And so I think it's a big test for Abingdon Avon in that sense. But also on the flip side, if you're Knoxville, this is a test going up against an undefeated football team playing with a lot of confidence. And so you got to come in and keep doing what you've done well against the defense that's really limited people. So this is another really intriguing matchup. It is on Saturday night. It's a Saturday night game. Yep. So I may not have the option to get to this one. If I usually go out and cover football on Friday night, my wife is not usually crazy about me then going again on Saturday and being gone. So I may end up, hopefully this one is live streamed somewhere so I can catch some of the action. But probably won't be at this one, but it is going to be a great game.
Yeah. If Knoxville, if you're listening, and I know you are, trust me, Blue Bullet Nation, I know you're listening. If there is a stream to this game, please let us know, because I would really want to watch this on Saturday night.
All right, let's move into the other games in the Lincoln Trail Conference. Mercer County. Mitch, can we pat ourselves in the back again? Because we said
you did. I'm not going to take credit for this one, because this was one that you pointed out early. Again, when they were probably around the 2-2 mark, I think is when, or maybe it was when they were 2-3. When you pointed that out. So kudos to you on this one.
All right. Well, hey, I saw it because I thought that they were playing well enough to get some wins. Mercer County gets the win on homecoming. They beat Ridgewood 64-6. Mercer County's running back, David Meese, a name we've talked about, scored 3 touchdowns in the first half. Golden Warriors now 4-3. They're winners of 3 straight. So I think this is a team that, they're playing well at the right time. Their losses, have come against really good football teams. Unfortunately, they had the COVID loss to Knoxville, but their other losses were to A-Town, who's undefeated, and to Farmington, who's undefeated. So their losses are as good as you could possibly expect out of a loss. So this is a team to keep your eye on. Other wins around the conference, Anawan Wethersfield gets the 46-6 win over Stark County. Darius Dickerson rushes for 198 yards, 2 touchdowns. Dylan Horry, 6 of 9 passing, 117 with 3 touchdowns. Cole Truxell, 91 yards, 2 touchdowns to lead Anawan Wethersfield. So big win there for the Titans. They're now at 4-3 on the season. And United gets another big win. They're winners 40-14 over Rova Williamsfield. United now also sits at 4-3 on the season. Mitch, we talked about it a little bit last week, but credit to David Milroy and this United Red Storm team. This team struggled, man. They struggled to find wins, and now they're going into week 8 at 4-3. That's huge credit to them and what they've done to flip this program around. the tough news is they got some pretty good opponents waiting on their schedule. But man, if you want to make an impact, let's do it. Here you go. You got everything sitting in front of you now. It's sitting at 4-3.
Yeah, so sitting at 4-3 and you're on the road both games too. So that adds to the difficulty going to Rushville this week and then ending the game at Abingdon. So we'll see what happens there with United. But when you're talking about Anawan, Wethersfield, and Mercer County, I think both teams get to that 5th win this week, and then they play each other in week 9. So if you have a 5-4 Wethersfield team and a 5-4 Mercer County team up against one another in week 9, with, again, hopefully that's enough to get them in with the strength of in Mercer County's case, Farmington, Knoxville, Abingdon. But if both those teams are 5-3, I guess it would be going into that game, and there's an automatic berth on the line, that's going to be a very, very big game for both programs.
Yeah, absolutely. When you start talking about the impact and Anawan, Wethersfield, and Mercer County, historically going back 10 years or more, those are the teams that are battling for the LTC. In this case, battling for playoff positioning. Yeah, certainly both teams. That's a really intriguing matchup heading into week 9. But Mitch, let's look at what we got for week 8. We already broke it down. A-Town at Knoxville, Mercer County at Stark County, Princeville at Ridgewood, Rova Williamsfield at Anawan Wethersfield, and United goes on the road to Rushville Industry. Mitch, I can't think of a better way for David Milroy and that United Red Storm program to keep things building in the positive direction. How about getting a non-conference win on the road at Rushville Industry?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's possible.
Yep.
I think there's something there. I think it's possible. They'd have to play really well, but I think it's possible. That's a good Rushville Industry team with a good record. But man, go get the job done. I would love to see it.
Yep, the way they've been playing, it certainly is possible. But yeah, A-Town in Knoxville is certainly going to get the headlines from us and probably for elsewhere, I think, just because with what that game's going to mean here with the conference title on the line. But again, the teams that we talked about, can Mercer County, get a winnable game against Stark County, and can A&W get a winnable game against Rova and get that 5th win under their belt to really set up that big week 9 matchup. So again, as we've talked about it, with shorter and shorter time left in the season, we're seeing a lot of really important games across all of these conferences that we play, or that we cover, I should say.
Yeah. So the big one, all eyes will be on Abingdon Avon at Knoxville. That's the historic rivalry with the conference championship on the line. Both of those teams sit at 6-0, and they're both undefeated in conference play. Mercer County is at 4-2 in conference play. United is sitting right behind them at 4-3 in conference play. Anawan Wethersfield also at 4-3. So, I mean, just, a lot of shifting could go on right there at the top of that conference. But, it'll be a lot of fun to talk about. And I think the headline, obviously, A-Town and Knoxville, we'll be breaking that one down in a week and seeing what happens.
Yeah. And again, like you said, looking at these rankings, I think LTC does get 5 teams in, and adding to the 7 or 8 that get in from the track, and the 4 that get in from the Western Big Six. So, and however many are, the 4 or 5 that get in from the NUIC. We are very fortunate that we're going to be continuing this podcast well into the playoffs.
Well, that's good. We'll have plenty to talk about then.
Job security.
That's right. Job security. Absolutely. Hey, Mitch, we're going to get to my favorite segment of the show. It's that Ottawa Marquette gets the big win, 49-14 over Walther Christian. The Crusaders improve to 6-1, playing that independent schedule. Yep. So they're looking good in Class 1A. I don't want to tout too much on my alma mater, but I will say it's exciting times for the Crusaders. They have they have Christ the King out of Chicago next week on the road. and they end at home against the Fisher Bunnies. So 2 games left in their schedule. But man, my Crusaders, I'm excited. We'll be talking about them in the playoffs too, Mitch. I promise, whether you want to or not. So
yeah, what I'd really like to do is talk about that Week 9 matchup against the best helmet in the United States. So
that's true. The Fisher Bunnies have the best helmet. So, but Mitch, Marquette kind of looks like Notre Dame, so that kind of pulls at you a little bit, right?
Yeah, they're probably less anxiety filled of a football team than I'd prefer, because they've really done a good job this year in their independence, with their only loss being to a really good DMAC team. So
yep.
If they can, it looks like they probably will win these next 2 games, and they go into 1A at 8-1. It's just another team in 1A that is in our area, and it gives credence to my thought that we're going to see a state champion from our area in 1A. So
yeah, well, as Kyle Kampmier will always quickly remind me, Otto Marquette's got to beat somebody from the NUIC if they want to make things happen in the postseason. Yep. So that's always, the road always runs through the Northwest part of the state. So, plenty to talk about in the coming weeks. But anyway, I always love shouting out Marquette.
Yep.
Hey, Mitch, speaking of the Northwest Upstate Illini, I don't want to totally cut you out of all conversation involving the great small school conference that is the NUIC. Me and Kyle broke down everything from week 7, but hey, let's look ahead to week 8. East Dubuque on the road at Dakota, Fulton on the road after their big win over Forreston. They go on the road to Eastland Pearl City. Galena goes on the road to Du-Pec. Du-Pec, the big statement win over Lena-Winslow.
Yep.
Lena-Winslow is on the road at Stockton, and Gibson City Melvin Sibley traveling to Forreston on Saturday for the non-conference crossover game there. So that's an intriguing matchup right away. Forreston looking to bounce back against the Gibson City Melvin Sibley team that is usually one of the top teams in the smaller 1A, 2A southern part of the state. They're struggling a little bit this year. They're not quite that top tier team. But man, I still think that's a test coming in for Forreston, and they're really looking to bounce back. You almost feel bad for Gibson City Melvin Sibley, because they could be running into a Forreston team that's maybe a little bit extra motivated this week to prove themselves.
Yeah, you look at those two names, it makes me think of playoff football with the history behind those two. So can Forreston get a bounce back win? I no discredit to Fulton. I did think Forreston was going to win that game with what Fulton came into the game with, losing a couple players that you guys talked about. I wouldn't want to play Forreston either. I'm intrigued by Galena going to Du-Pec. Can Du-Pec manage the emotions? Because they've got a hungry Galena team coming in. Galena trying to get that 5th win. And so can they had a big Friday night. How has their week prep, been? How has their week prep been? And can they kind of sustain that? Because the job is not done yet. They do still need to. I think if they win this one, it would automatically, because they would hold the tie break over Lena. I think had Forreston won against Fulton, there was still some intrigue there, maybe going into last week. But if my math is right, I think if Du-Pec wins, that would give them the crown here. The flip side of that, can Lee Wynn handle the emotions of coming off of a tough loss? Judging by listening to their players and coaches after the game, I think they'll be fine. They know who they are. They know what their strengths are. But playing against a good Stockton team that's coming off a big win, showing their offensive muscle on Saturday. This is again another week where there's a lot of playoff positioning, seedings, and qualifications on the line. And let's see if Du-Pec can close this out and get that title.
That's, I think, the important factor. You just nailed it right there at the end. Du-Pec gets the big win in what we've joked about, or not joked about, but talked about as being the NUIC conference championship game against Lena-Winslow. But the fact is, there's still 2 weeks left in the season. You got to close it out. So for Du-Pec, they got to finish it now. They got to close the door. And I think they're in a good position to do that. But man, you can't sleepwalk through Galena. Galena's a good football team. And I think they're hungry like every other team this time of year because they're sitting at 4 and they want to get to that 5th win. So, yep, that's an intriguing matchup. As for a team like Fulton, that was a huge win because Kyle referenced it earlier in the podcast. That win over Forreston may have meant the difference between a road game or now you're a home game in the playoffs if you can finish it off. And now they have Eastland Pearl City, who's 0-6 or 0-7, and they have Dakota, who's also been struggling. So, Fulton, it's all in front of them. They have the opportunity here to really close out strong after a big win over Forreston. But like we've talked about, you got to get the job done. So that's what it comes down to for all these teams. Get the job done now in week 8 and week 9 and really set yourself up good in the playoffs. Mitch, let's talk about a little 8-man before we wrap things up here. In the 8-man ranks, Amboy is on the road at Orangeville. That game's on Saturday. Another Saturday game, Aquin at West Prairie. Hiawatha travels to Polo. Milledgeville would have hosted AFC, but AFC has canceled their season. So at this point, I believe Milledgeville will have a bye week. I don't know that for sure if they found anyone else to play. River Ridge on the road at Alden Hebron. Mitch, how about Milledgeville, man? They've come on strong and looked really good. They're now sitting at 6-1 on the year, and their only loss is to a 7-0 Polo team.
Yep. Yeah. Connor Nye just continues to really rack up the yards and the touchdowns. So that's a name that should be mentioned. If you're talking about really dynamic impact players in the area. And again, maybe doesn't get the notoriety being an 8-man. But don't, we've said it, we'll continue to say it. We always say, don't sleep on 8-man football. It's a lot of fun. It's a good option for schools and areas that might struggle with numbers. And Milledgeville is proof of that. Tough for AFC, obviously, and tough for Milledgeville to get a bye week, so to speak, as they try and continue that momentum going into playoffs. Because I think that they'll be a force to be reckoned with. In this one, Amboy going to Orangeville. Amboy, if you remember, put up like 60 points on West Central. So sitting at 4 wins on the year. Orangeville, obviously, a really, really, really good team. But that stands out to me in the games here because not as strong of a week for 8-man, but Amboy and Orangeville is certainly an intriguing matchup.
Yeah, that's one that, can Amboy put something together and pull off, another big win? That big one against West Central was huge for their season. You start looking ahead between Polo, Milledgeville, Orangeville, and Aquin, and even Amboy to a certain extent. Man, they're going to be a force to reckon with in the 8-man division of the playoffs. And it's going to be a lot of fun. I hope I can get to one of these 8-man games, see it in person. I've seen 8-man on the Iowa side of the river years ago when I was covering stuff for on the TV side of things. But I really hope I can get to one of these Illinois 8-man games, especially come playoff time. It's going to be great because these teams have looked really good, and I think they're going to be the teams that dominate going forward.
Yeah, looking at the teams in the South for 8-man, not to take anything away from them, but I think that you'll get the champion from 8-man from the teams in the area that we cover from the north section of 8-man football, just because it's so tough. But that's going to be a really fun playoff to watch too.
Kyle did mention earlier that he really is impressed with St. Thomas More out of Champaign.
Yep.
That's a team that's really caught his eye. They've put up some big time numbers the past few weeks. And Decatur Lutheran, they had a couple COVID losses, forfeit losses, but they've really looked strong other than that. So I think there's a few teams.
Strong defense. Yeah, strong defense is there. but I don't know that the offenses in the South are as good as the North. So it'll all come to a head eventually. But I stick by my stance that the North is superior in 8-man.
All right. I love it. Well, we will be certainly talking about it over the next 2, 3, 4, even more weeks than that. So it'll be a ton of fun. Mitch, thank you so much for being here. We got 3 conference championship games, essentially. We'll call them conference championship games to break down next week. So, we'll meet here same time, same place, and we'll see where it all shakes out and what it looks like heading into week 9. Like you said, 3 crowns will be decided, and then it'll really shape up a week 9 that is going to have maybe not conference title implications, but certainly playoff implications, both in terms of qualifying and seeding. Yep. Well, thank you so much to everyone who listens, who downloads, who subscribes, everyone who follows along on Twitter. We really appreciate it. We will see you next week. That'll do it for this week's episode of View from the West. Thank you so much for listening. I encourage you to go out to Apple Podcasts or Podbean and subscribe so you can follow along, and downloads will come automatically every week. You can follow along on Twitter at ViewFromWestPod. You can also email me if you're interested in being a sponsor, viewfromwestpod@gmail.com. Thanks so much. We'll see you next week.